Do you believe in reincarnation? What if we told you right now that there are real documented cases that suggest we don't just live one life, but many lives across different timelines, all happening at once? If you think reincarnation is just a spiritual belief with no evidence, or that memories from past lives are simply fantasies, then we're really curious to hear how you're going to explain these 12 mysterious cases. Because what you're about to hear goes far beyond simple rebirth. These cases suggest something even more mind-blowing, that all your lives, past, present, and future, might be happening simultaneously in parallel timelines, and sometimes the barriers between them break down. So, let's jump straight into the first case. And trust me, this one will completely mess with everything you think you know about reality. This case is absolutely fascinating, and it happened in a small village in northern India in 1993. A 4-year-old boy named Titu Singh started having vivid nightmares, screaming in the middle of the night about being shot in the head. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. Titu didn't just remember dying. He remembered dying as someone specific, someone his family had never told him about. He claimed he was Suresh Verma, a man who owned a radio shop in a nearby town and was murdered in 1983, 10 years before Titu was even born. The absolutely insane part? Suresh Verma was Titu's own grandfather on his mother's side. And the family had deliberately never spoken about him or shown Titu any photographs. So, how did this 4-year-old boy know intimate details about a murder that happened a decade before his birth? Titu's parents, Narendra and Usha Singh, were deeply disturbed by their son's nightmares. But it wasn't just the dreams. During the day, Titu would suddenly start talking about his shop and his wife and how he needed to go back to protect his money. He would describe the layout of a radio repair shop in perfect detail, talking about where the tools were kept, which customers owed him money, and even the color of the walls. His mother would try to redirect him, to get him to play with his toys, but Titu would become agitated and insist that his real life was somewhere else. Imagine being a parent and hearing your 4-year-old child talk about a previous life with such absolute conviction. Pretty creepy, right? But then something happened that made the family realize this was more than just a child's imagination. One day in late 1993, Titu begged his parents to take him to the town of Agra, about 60 kilometers away. He said he needed to see his wife and children. His parents tried to ignore him, but Titu became so distressed that they finally agreed, thinking perhaps the trip would prove to him that his memories weren't real. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would shake their understanding of reality. When they arrived in Agra, Titu immediately began giving directions. Turn left here, go straight, stop at that corner. His parents had never taken him to this town before, yet he navigated the streets like he'd lived there his entire life. Then he pointed to a small shop with peeling paint and a broken sign and said, quote, 2. The family went inside, quote, end quote, and the current owner confirmed that, yes, the shop had once been a radio repair business, and yes, the previous owner had been murdered in 1983. His name was Suresh Verma. Now, here's where it gets even more incredible. Titu asked to meet Suresh's widow, a woman named Uma Verma. When Uma came to see who was asking for her, Titu looked up at this complete stranger and said, quote, 3. Uma's face went white. The details of her husband's murder had never been made public. It was a robbery gone wrong. 2 men had broken into the shop late at night, and when Suresh resisted, they shot him, once in the head. Exactly as Titu had been describing in his nightmares. But the evidence didn't stop there. Titu pointed to specific items in Uma's home, things he said belonged to him. He identified family members he'd never met, calling them by name and recounting personal stories about them. He even led police to a location where Suresh had hidden a small amount of money that Uma didn't even know existed. Researchers who later investigated this case, including Dr. Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia, documented over 60 specific details that Titu knew about Suresh Verma's life. Details that a 4-year-old child from a different town should have had absolutely no way of knowing. So, how do you explain this? Skeptics argue that Titu must have overheard conversations, that perhaps someone in the family had secretly told him about Suresh. but the family insists they never spoke about the murder, and the level of detail Titu provided, the hidden money, the names of customers, the specific layout of the shop, goes far beyond anything a child could have overheard. Others suggest this is proof of reincarnation, that Suresh Verma's consciousness somehow entered Titu's body. But here's the truly mind-bending part. If Titu really is Suresh reincarnated, then he's literally his own grandfather. His mother's father living again as her son. Does this mean we can be reborn into our own family bloodlines? Are our souls somehow tethered to our genetic lineage, cycling through the same family tree across multiple lifetimes? Or is something even stranger happening here? What if Titu and Suresh are living simultaneously in parallel timelines, and for some reason, their consciousnesses overlapped? Allowing Titu to access memories from a life that technically ended before he was even born? Absolutely fascinating. And trust me, if you found this case intriguing, just wait until you hear what's coming next. In 2006, something happened in Edinburgh, Scotland that left linguists and researchers completely baffled. A 2-year-old girl named Cameron Macaulay began speaking fluent sentences in a language her parents didn't recognize. At first, they thought it was just made-up gibberish, the way toddlers sometimes create their own words. But when they recorded her and brought the recordings to the University of Edinburgh, professors in the Celtic Studies department froze. Cameron was speaking ancient Gaelic, a dialect that hadn't been commonly used in over 300 years. And she was using grammatical structures that only appeared in historical texts. The truly chilling part? She kept talking about her other mother on the island of Barra, describing a white house by the beach and a black car that her father drove. Her parents had never been to Barra, had no Scottish ancestry, and had never exposed Cameron to any Gaelic language or culture. Cameron's mother, Norma Macaulay, was a single parent who worked as a nurse in Edinburgh. She had no connection to the Hebrides Islands and had never visited Barra in her entire life. So, when her daughter started crying every night, begging to go home to her house, quote, 5, on Barra, Norma assumed Cameron had perhaps seen something on television or overheard a conversation at daycare, but Cameron's descriptions were far too specific for that. She talked about a white house that stood alone near the beach with black rocks in the garden. She said her other mother's name was Jane and her brothers were called John and Angus. She even drew pictures of the house, always the same layout, always with 3 windows at the front and a red door. Imagine hearing your 2-year-old child speak with such certainty about a life you know she's never lived. Extremely unsettling, right? But then Professor Donald MacLeod from the Celtic Studies department made a discovery that sent chills down everyone's spine. After analyzing the recordings carefully, he determined that Cameron wasn't just speaking Gaelic. She was speaking a specific dialect that was primarily used on the island of Barra in the 17th and 18th centuries. This dialect had distinct pronunciations and grammatical structures that differed from modern Scottish Gaelic. Professor MacLeod said in his report, and this is a direct quote, "This child is using verb conjugations and vocabulary that I've only seen in manuscripts from the 1700s. There is no way she could have learned this from any contemporary source." What happened next is what makes this case truly extraordinary. In 2007, a documentary crew decided to take Cameron and her mother to the island of Barra to see if any of her descriptions were accurate. Norma was skeptical, expecting that the trip would prove once and for all that Cameron's memories were just fantasies. But when they arrived on the island and started driving along the coastal road, Cameron suddenly became animated and started pointing. Quote, this 7. She was pointing at a white house that stood alone near the beach. Exactly as she had described. The house had 3 windows at the front and a red door. There were black rocks arranged in the garden. The current owners of the house allowed the crew inside, and Cameron walked through the rooms like she'd lived there her entire life. She pointed to where furniture used to be, described renovations that had been made, and even mentioned a small hiding spot under the stairs where she said her brothers used to keep their toys. When the owners checked the history of the house, they discovered that in the early 1970s, a family had indeed lived there. The mother's name was Jane. She had 3 children, a daughter who died very young, and 2 sons named John and Angus. Cameron's descriptions matched perfectly. Now here's where it gets even more fascinating. Researchers also confirmed that the family who lived in that house in the 1970s had distant ancestors who lived in the same location in the 18th century, right when the dialect Cameron was speaking would have been commonly used. So, is Cameron remembering a life from the 1970s, the 1700s? Or somehow both at the same time? Linguistic experts have absolutely no explanation for how a 2-year-old child in Edinburgh could speak a 300-year-old dialect with perfect grammar and pronunciation. There's no course you can take, no television show you can watch, no audio recording readily available that would teach this specific form of ancient Gaelic. Skeptics argue that Cameron must have somehow been exposed to historical recordings at the university, or that perhaps Norma had Scottish ancestry she wasn't aware of. But the dialect Cameron spoke is so obscure that even most Gaelic language professors can't speak it fluently. Others suggest this is a clear case of reincarnation, that Cameron lived before as someone on Barra and retained the language. But here's what's truly mind-bending. If Cameron is remembering a past life, why does she remember multiple time periods? The house from the 1970s and the language from the 1700s? What if Cameron isn't accessing memories from one past life, but from multiple lives happening simultaneously in different timelines? What if every version of ourselves across all timelines shares the same consciousness? And sometimes, especially in young children whose minds are still developing, the barriers between these timelines become thin enough that memories bleed through. Could Cameron's soul have lived multiple lives on Barra across different centuries? And now all those memories are surfacing at once? Pretty fascinating when you think about it. And if this case already has you questioning everything, just hold on, because the next one is even more intense. This case became one of the most documented reincarnation stories in modern history, and it involves a young American boy named James Leininger. When James was just 2 years old in 2000, he began having horrific nightmares about being trapped in a plane that was on fire and crashing into the ocean. He would scream and thrash in his sleep, and when his parents tried to comfort him, he would sob and say the same thing over and over. "Plane on fire, little man can't get out." As James got older, the details became more and more specific. He said his plane was a Corsair, that it had been shot down by the Japanese, that he took off from a ship called the Natoma, and that he had a friend on the ship named Jack Larson. His father, Bruce Leininger, was a skeptic who didn't believe in reincarnation at all. But then he started investigating, and what he discovered made his blood run cold. Bruce and his wife Andrea lived in Dallas, Texas, and they were completely ordinary parents dealing with what they thought was just childhood trauma or an overactive imagination. Bruce worked in human resources. Andrea was a former professional dancer. Neither of them had any military background. And they had never exposed James to World War II, history, or aircraft. In fact, they actively avoided war movies and violent content around their young son. So, when James started obsessively drawing pictures of planes being shot down, always with the same details, flames coming from the engine, a red circle on the fuselage representing the Japanese flag, they became deeply concerned. Imagine watching your toddler draw the same violent death scene over and over again with disturbing accuracy. Pretty unsettling, right? But then James said something that made Bruce decide to investigate seriously. During one of his nightmares in 2002, James woke up screaming, and when Andrea asked him who the little man was that couldn't get out of the plane, James looked at her with tears streaming down his face and said, "Me, I'm the little man." He then told his parents his name used to be James too, James Houston. He said he flew off a boat, and when his father asked what kind of boat, James, who was 3 years old at the time, said, "An aircraft carrier, the Natoma Bay." Bruce thought this was impossible. How would a 3-year-old even know what an aircraft carrier was? So he started researching, and what he found shook him to his core. The USS Natoma Bay was a real escort carrier that served in the Pacific during World War II. Bruce contacted the Natoma Bay Association, a group of veterans and historians who documented the ship's history. He asked if anyone named James Houston had served on the Natoma Bay. The answer came back within days. Yes. James McCready, Houston Jr., was a 21-year-old fighter pilot stationed on the Natoma Bay. He was shot down by Japanese anti-aircraft fire during the Battle of Iwo Jima on March 3, 1945. His plane was hit in the engine, caught fire, and crashed into the ocean. He died on impact. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. Young James Leininger had provided specific details that matched the historical record perfectly. The Corsair aircraft, the Natoma Bay, even the name Jack Larson. Bruce discovered that Jack Larson was a real pilot who served alongside James Houston, and was actually the only person who witnessed Houston's plane going down. But Bruce didn't stop there. He tracked down Jack Larson, who was still alive and in his 80s, living in Arkansas. When Bruce called him and explained what his son had been saying, there was a long silence on the phone. Then Jack said, "How could your boy know that? I watched Houston's plane get hit. I saw the fire. I was the only one close enough to see it happen." But the evidence gets even more compelling. James Leininger had recurring nightmares about his plane being hit in a specific location, the engine. Historical records confirm that Houston's plane was struck in the engine by anti-aircraft fire. Young James also talked about flying off Natoma, quote, Nat 12. And when his parents asked him to name them, he listed several names. Every single name corresponded to real pilots who served on the Natoma Bay. James even pointed to Iwo Jima on a map and said, quote, 13 before he could even read properly. Researchers and psychologists, including Dr. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia, studied James's case extensively. They documented over 50 specific details that James provided about James Houston's life, details that a young child in Dallas, Texas, should have had absolutely no access to. Skeptics argued that perhaps James had seen a documentary, or that his parents had unconsciously fed him information. But Bruce and Andrea insist they knew nothing about the Natoma Bay or World War II Pacific battles before their son started having these nightmares. The level of specificity, the names, the technical details about Corsair aircraft, the exact location of the battle, all of it matches historical records perfectly. So, how do we explain this? Is James Leininger actually James Houston reincarnated? If so, why did he retain such vivid memories of his death when most people who believe in reincarnation claim we forget our past lives? Or is something even stranger happening here? What if James Houston's consciousness never actually left this world when his plane crashed in 1945? What if his soul existed in a kind of temporal overlap, waiting for the right moment, the right body to return? Some researchers suggest that traumatic deaths create a kind of energetic imprint that can attach to a new life, especially if that new life shares the same name. But here's the truly mind-bending possibility. What if James Leininger and James Houston are living simultaneously in the different timelines, and young James's mind is somehow tapped into the experience of his parallel self dying in 1945? Think about this. If all moments in time exist at once, then James Houston is still dying in that plane crash, right now, in another layer of reality. And maybe, just maybe, consciousness isn't bound by linear time the way we think it is. Absolutely fascinating when you consider the implications. And trust me, if this case already has you questioning the nature of reality, what's coming next will completely blow your mind. In 2012, a therapist in London documented one of the strangest cases she had ever encountered. A 38-year-old woman named Rachel came to her suffering from severe anxiety and a persistent feeling that she was living in the wrong timeline. During a routine hypnotherapy session meant to address childhood trauma, Rachel suddenly began speaking in a different voice, describing her death in a car accident on the M25 motorway in 2009. But here's the absolutely insane part. Rachel was alive and sitting in the therapist's office in 2012. She described the accident in perfect detail. The rain, the truck that swerved into her lane, the moment of impact, even the paramedics who arrived too late. The therapist was disturbed enough to investigate, and what she found was truly unsettling. There actually was a fatal car accident on the M25 in 2009 involving a woman matching Rachel's description, but the victim was never identified. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Holloway, had been practicing hypnotherapy for over 15 years and had seen countless cases of repressed memories, childhood trauma, and anxiety disorders. But she had never experienced anything like what happened on October 19th. 2012. Rachel had come to her complaining of persistent nightmares and a feeling of displacement, like she didn't belong in her own life. Dr. Holloway thought this was likely dissociation, brought on by stress or trauma, so she began a standard regression therapy session. Rachel went under easily. Her breathing slowed, her body relaxed. But then, without any prompting, Rachel's voice changed. It became distant, hollow, almost emotionless, and she started describing her own death. Rachel said it was November 7th, 2009, around 8:30 in the evening. She was driving home from work on the M25 near Junction 23. The rain was heavy, the kind that makes it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. She described feeling tired, wanting to get home, when suddenly an articulated lorry in the next lane lost control and swerved directly into her path. She said she didn't even have time to scream. The impact was instant. She described the sound of metal crushing, the airbag deploying but not fast enough, and then a strange sensation of floating above the wreckage, watching paramedics arrive 20 minutes later. She said she watched them pronounce her dead at the scene. Imagine being a therapist and hearing your very much alive patient describe their own death in perfect, chilling detail. Extremely creepy, right? Dr. Holloway assumed this was a particularly vivid anxiety-induced fantasy, but something about the specificity bothered her. Rachel had mentioned the exact junction, the exact time, even the fact that the truck was carrying construction materials that spilled across the motorway. So, Doctor? Holloway did something most therapists wouldn't do. She started investigating. She contacted the Metropolitan Police and requested accident reports from the M25 for November 2009. What she found made her question everything she thought she knew about reality. There was indeed a fatal traffic accident on the M25 near Junction 23 on November 7, 2009. At approximately 8:35 in the evening, a woman driving a dark blue Vauxhall Corsa was killed when an articulated lorry carrying construction materials lost control in heavy rain and collided with her vehicle. The woman died at the scene. Paramedics arrived at 8:57, 22 minutes after the initial collision, exactly as Rachel had described. But here's what made Dr. Holloway's blood run cold. The victim was never positively identified. The car was registered to a woman named Sarah Mitchell, but when police contacted her, Sarah Mitchell was alive and well, living in Manchester. She said her car had been stolen 3 weeks earlier, but she never reported it because she didn't have insurance and didn't want to deal with the police. Now, here's where it gets absolutely mind-bending. Doctor. Holloway showed Rachel photographs from her own life, family photos, work identification, her driver's license. In every photo, Rachel looked exactly like witness descriptions of the woman who died in that crash. Same age, same build, same distinctive auburn hair, even the same small scar above her right eyebrow from a childhood accident. But the crash happened in 2009, and Rachel was sitting in Dr. Holloway's office 3 years later, very much alive. The police report described the victim as approximately 35 years old, which would have been Rachel's exact age in 2009. The coroner's report noted the victim was wearing a silver necklace with a small compass pendant. Rachel was wearing the exact same necklace during her therapy session. Dr. Holloway interviewed Rachel's family and colleagues. No one could account for Rachel's whereabouts on November 7, 2009. Rachel herself said she remembered nothing unusual about that day, but she admitted she had no specific memory of where she was or what she was doing that evening. Some of her friends said Rachel seemed different after November 2009, quieter, more withdrawn, like she was struggling with something she couldn't articulate. One colleague said, quote 15, "So, how do you explain this?" Skeptics would say it's obviously a case of false memory, that Rachel somehow read about the accident and incorporated it into her subconscious. But how would she know about an unidentified victim in a crash that received minimal media coverage? How would she know the exact time the paramedics arrived, a detail that was only in the police report? Others believe this is proof of the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics, the idea that every decision creates a branching timeline. Maybe Rachel did die in that crash in one timeline, but in this timeline, somehow, she survived or never had the accident at all. But here's the truly terrifying possibility that Dr. Holloway documented in her case notes, "What if Rachel died in the crash and the Rachel sitting in her office is living in a parallel timeline where the crash never happened? What if both versions are real, both happening simultaneously, and Rachel's consciousness is somehow aware of both? That would explain the feeling of living in the wrong timeline, the persistent anxiety, the sense that something fundamental is wrong with her existence." Think about this. What if you died in another timeline, and some part of you knows it? Could we all be living multiple versions of our lives simultaneously? And most of us are just unaware of the other timelines where we made different choices or where different events occurred. Is Rachel's case evidence that sometimes the walls between these parallel realities become thin enough that we can glimpse our own deaths in other timelines? Absolutely fascinating and absolutely terrifying at the same time. And if you think that case was intense, hold on tight, because what's coming next is even more impossible to explain. For centuries, Tibetan Buddhists have used reincarnation to select their religious leaders, and while many dismiss this as pure tradition, one case from 1995 is so specific and verifiable that it leaves even skeptics struggling for answers. When the 16th Karmapa died in 1981, the search began for his reincarnation. A young boy in Tibet named Ogyen Trinley Dorje was identified as the 17th Karmapa when he was just 7 years old. But what makes this case so extraordinary is how he was found. The child had never been taught to read or write, had never left his small village, and had no contact with anyone from the monastery. Yet, when the search party arrived at his home in 1992, before they could say anything, the 7-year-old boy looked at them and said, "You've come for me. I am the Karmapa. My monastery is in Surfu." Then he described in perfect detail the layout of a monastery he had never visited, identified monks he had never met, and pointed to personal belongings of the previous Karmapa, saying, "These are mine." The Karmapa is one of the highest-ranking lamas in Tibetan Buddhism, considered to be the living embodiment of compassion and wisdom. When a Karmapa dies, senior monks begin an elaborate search for the reincarnated soul, following mystical visions, prophecies, and signs that are supposed to lead them to the right child. In the case of the 17th Karmapa, the search took over a decade. The 16th Karmapa, Rangjung Rigpe Dorje, died in a hospital in Illinois on November 5, 1981. Before his death, he left a letter predicting details about his next incarnation, sealed and hidden away. The letter wouldn't be opened until the search party believed they had found the right child. Ogyen Trinley Dorje was born on June 26, 1985, in a nomadic family's tent in the Lhadak region of eastern Tibet, one of the most remote and isolated areas in the world. His family were simple herders who moved with their yak and sheep, living in tents with no access to education, books, or outside information. Imagine growing up in complete isolation, never attending school, never seeing a monastery, never meeting a monk. That was Ogyen's life for the first 7 years. His parents said he was a quiet child, but he sometimes did strange things. He would arrange stones in specific patterns and insist they were, quote, 18 Buddhist structures he'd never seen. He would sit for hours in meditation postures no one had taught him. But then in June of 1992, a search party of senior monks from Surfu Monastery arrived at the family's camp. They had followed a series of visions and prophecies that led them to this specific region, but they hadn't identified a specific child yet. They were visiting multiple families with young boys born around the predicted time. When they approached Ogyen's tent, something extraordinary happened. Before the monks could introduce themselves or explain why they were there, 7-year-old Ogyen walked up to them, looked directly at the leader of the search party, and said in a calm, matter-of-fact voice, quote, 19. Now, here's where it gets absolutely mind-bending. The monks decided to test him. They brought out several items, some that belonged to the 16th Karmapa and some that didn't. Without hesitation, Ogyen picked out every single item that had belonged to the previous Karmapa. A ritual bell, a specific prayer bead mala, a small statue, a ceremonial hat. He held each one and said, quote, 20, quote. The monks then asked him to describe Surfu Monastery, the seat of the Karmapa, located hundreds of miles away in central Tibet. Ogyen had never left his region, had never seen a photograph of the monastery. and his illiterate nomadic family had never described it to him. Yet he drew a detailed map of the monastery layout, pointing out where the main shrine room was, where the monks' quarters were located, even where a specific tree grew in the courtyard. But it gets even more incredible. When the monks showed him photographs of the previous Karmapa's attendants and other monks from Surfu, Ogian identified them by name. He pointed to one elderly monk and said, quote, 21, quote. He pointed to another and said, quote, 22, quote, 22. Every single identification was correct. These were monks Ogian had never met, names he had never heard, faces he had never seen. The senior monks in the search party were stunned. They opened the sealed letter left by the 16th Karmapa, and the predictions inside matched perfectly. The letter described the location where the child would be born, the family circumstances, even the year of birth. Researchers and skeptics have tried for decades to explain this case. Some argue that perhaps the monks unconsciously guided the boy, giving him hints or cues. But the boy spoke first, before the monks revealed why they were there. Others suggest the family might have coached him, hoping for the prestige of having the Karmapa as their son. But the family were simple nomads with no knowledge of Buddhist theology or monastery layouts. There's absolutely no evidence they had any contact with anyone from Surfu Monastery or access to information about the previous Karmapa's personal belongings. So, how do you explain a 7-year-old illiterate nomad boy who knows intricate details about a monastery he's never visited, recognizes people he's never met, and identifies personal objects he's never seen? Believers in reincarnation say this is clear proof that consciousness survives death and can be reborn into a new body while retaining memories from the previous life. But here's what's truly fascinating. Ogian didn't just remember random facts. He remembered being the Karmapa. He had a sense of identity that carried over from one life to the next. Think about this. If reincarnation is real, does that mean we all carry fragments of our past lives within us, but most of us just aren't aware of it? Or is there something special about certain souls, certain consciousnesses, that allows them to remember while the rest of us forget? And here's an even stranger possibility. What if Ogian isn't remembering a past life at all? What if the 16th and 17th Karmapa are the same consciousness existing in parallel timelines, and Ogian is somehow accessing the experiences of his parallel self, who lived from 1924 to 1981? Could advanced spiritual practice create a kind of quantum entanglement of consciousness across time, allowing the same soul to exist in multiple bodies simultaneously? Is the Karmapa lineage proof that consciousness isn't bound by linear time the way we think it is? Absolutely fascinating when you consider the implications. And trust me, if this case already has you questioning the nature of identity and time, the next one is going to completely shatter your understanding of reality. In 2004, a man named John Powell walked into a psychiatrist's office in Richmond, Virginia, complaining of what he called timeline bleeding. He said he was experiencing 2 lives simultaneously. During the day, he was John Powell, a 42-year-old accountant. But when he closed his eyes, even for a moment, he became Thomas Johnston, a Confederate soldier fighting in the Battle of Cold Harbor in 1864. The psychiatrist initially diagnosed this as a dissociative disorder, but then John began providing details that he couldn't possibly know. He drew detailed maps of Confederate trench positions that matched historical records perfectly. He described the names and faces of soldiers in his unit, soldiers whose names the psychiatrist later found in Civil War archives. Most disturbingly, John had a recurring sensation of being shot in the chest, and he kept pointing to the exact same spot on his ribcage. When he finally agreed to have an X-ray done, doctors found a mysterious calcified mass in that exact location, shaped almost like an old musket ball. John Powell lived a completely ordinary life in suburban Richmond. He worked for a mid-sized accounting firm, had been married for 12 years, had 2 kids, and spent his weekends coaching Little League baseball. He had no particular interest in the Civil War, had never participated in historical reenactments, and according to his wife, barely paid attention in history class when he was in school. But starting in late 2003, John began experiencing what he described as, quote, 24. He would be sitting at his desk working on spreadsheets, and suddenly he would smell gunpowder and hear cannon fire. He would close his eyes to rest them, and instantly he would be in a trench, covered in mud, holding a rifle that felt absolutely real in his hands. At first, John tried to ignore it, thinking it was stress or maybe early onset of some neurological condition. But the experiences became more intense and more frequent. By early 2004, he was having these episodes multiple times a day. His wife said he would be eating dinner with the family and suddenly freeze. His eyes would glaze over. And he would start mumbling about, quote, 25, quote, and quote, 26, quote. Imagine living two completely separate lives, one in the 21st century and one in 1864, and having absolutely no control over when you shift between them. Pretty terrifying, right? But then Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the psychiatrist John finally consulted in March 2004, noticed something that made her realize this was far more than a psychological disorder. During their sessions, when John would slip into what he called his, quote, 27, he would speak with a slight southern accent he didn't normally have. He would use vocabulary and phrases from the 1860s that Dr. Chen had to look up later. He talked about hardtack and minié balls and military commands using terminology that hadn't been common usage in over 100 years. Dr. Chen decided to test him. She asked John to draw a map of the battlefield at Cold Harbor. Without hesitation, John drew an incredibly detailed diagram showing trench positions, artillery placements, even the location of field hospitals. Dr. Chen contacted a Civil War historian at the University of Virginia and showed him the map without explaining where it came from. The historian stared at it for a long moment and then said, quote, 30. But it gets even more incredible. John provided the names of soldiers he claimed served alongside him in Company D of the 12th Virginia Infantry. He described a captain named Marcus Whitfield, a sergeant named Isaiah Drummond, and a young private named Billy Hutchins, who John said was only 16 years old and died in his arms during the battle. Dr. Chen spent weeks researching these names in Civil War military records and pension files. Every single name John mentioned was real. Marcus Whitfield was indeed a captain in the 12th Virginia Infantry. Isaiah Drummond was listed as a sergeant, and William Starbs is, quote, 31. 1. Hutchins was a private who enlisted at age 16 and was killed at Cold Harbor on June 3, 1864. The record showed he died from a gunshot wound to the abdomen. John had described holding Billy while he bled out, describing the exact location of the wound. How could a 42-year-old accountant with no interest in history know these obscure details about soldiers whose names appear only in dusty archives? Now, here's where it gets absolutely chilling. John kept complaining about a persistent pain in his chest, always in the same spot on the left side of his ribcage. He said it felt like burning, like something was lodged there. He described the sensation of being shot during the battle, feeling the impact, the immediate searing pain, and then everything going dark. Dr. Chen convinced him to get an X-ray to rule out any physical cause for the pain. When the radiologist looked at the images, he called Dr. Chen immediately. There was a calcified mass embedded in the tissue between John's ribs, approximately 3 centimeters in diameter, roughly spherical in shape. The radiologist said, quote, 32. Dr. Chen had the mass analyzed further. Specialists confirmed it was calcified tissue surrounding what appeared to be a metallic core, though it was too risky to remove it surgically just to satisfy curiosity. The shape and size were consistent with a Civil War-era minié ball, the type of bullet used in 1864. But John Powell was born in 1962. He had comprehensive medical records from childhood. There was absolutely no documented injury that could explain this mass. Yet, there it was, in the exact location where Thomas Johnston claimed he was shot during the Battle of Cold Harbor. So, how do we explain this? Skeptics argue that John must have obsessively studied the Civil War and developed an elaborate delusion, perhaps triggered by stress. But that doesn't explain the calcified mass in his chest, or how he knew details about soldiers that weren't in any popular books or documentaries. Believers in reincarnation say this is clear evidence that John is Thomas Johnston reborn, and the chest mass is a physical remnant from his death in a past life. But here's what makes this case truly extraordinary. John isn't remembering a past life. He's experiencing both lives simultaneously, as if they're happening at the same time. Think about this. What if time isn't linear like we believe? What if the past, present, and future are all happening right now in parallel layers of reality? Maybe John Powell and Thomas Johnston are the same consciousness existing in two different time periods simultaneously. And for some reason, John's mind can access both timelines at once. That would explain why he doesn't just remember being Thomas. He experiences being Thomas in real time. Is John Powell living proof that all moments in time exist simultaneously and consciousness can bridge between them? Could there be a version of you right now living in a completely different century, experiencing a completely different life, and you're just not aware of it? What if every person is actually living multiple lives across multiple timelines all at once, and John Powell is simply one of the rare cases where the walls between timelines became permeable? Absolutely mind-bending when you think about it. And trust me, if this case already has you questioning the nature of time itself, what's coming next is going to take it to an entirely new level. This case happened in 2013 in a small coastal town in Cornwall, England, and it's one of the most disturbing reincarnation cases ever documented. A 5-year-old girl named Emma nearly drowned in the ocean when a riptide pulled her under. She was underwater for nearly 4 minutes before lifeguards pulled her out, and she had no pulse. Paramedics revived her, and physically, she made a full recovery. But when Emma woke up in the hospital, she wasn't the same person. She spoke with a faint Irish accent that she'd never had before. She became terrified of the ocean, even though she had loved swimming her entire life. And most bizarrely, she started calling her parents by different names, insisting that her, quote, 33, quote, were named Kathleen and Patrick, and that she lived in a cottage in County Cork. Her parents were disturbed enough to contact researchers, and what they discovered was chilling. There were records of a girl named Emma O'Brien who drowned off the coast of Ireland in 1978. She was 5 years old. The cottage she described, the names of her parents, even the layout of her bedroom, all matched perfectly. Emma's parents, David and Claire Hartley, lived in the seaside village of Padstow on Cornwall's north coast. Their daughter had always been what they called a water baby. From the time she could walk, Emma loved the beach, loved splashing in the waves, loved collecting shells and building sandcastles. She had absolutely no fear of the ocean. So, on August 15, 2013, it seemed like a perfectly normal summer day when they took Emma to their usual beach for an afternoon swim. The water was calm, or at least it seemed that way. But riptides are invisible, and they can form without warning. Emma was playing in the shallows, the water only up to her waist, when suddenly she was pulled under. David saw her disappear and ran into the water, but the current was too strong. Lifeguards reached her first, pulling her limp body from the ocean 3 minutes and 40 seconds after she went under. She had no pulse, no breathing, her lips were blue. Paramedics performed CPR for 7 agonizing minutes before they got a heartbeat back. Emma was rushed to Royal Cornwall Hospital in Truro, where doctors monitored her closely for signs of brain damage from oxygen deprivation. Miraculously, after 2 days, Emma woke up. The doctors called it a complete recovery, but her parents knew immediately that something was wrong. The first thing Emma said when she opened her eyes was, "Where's ma'am?" But she didn't say it in her normal English accent. There was a distinct Irish lilt to her voice. Claire tried to comfort her, saying, quote, 36, quote, but Emma looked at her with confusion and said, quote, 37, quote. Over the next few days, the changes became more pronounced and more disturbing. Emma refused to answer to her own name. She insisted her name was Emma O'Brien and that she lived in a cottage near Kinsale in County Cork, Ireland. She described the cottage in vivid detail: a white structure with a thatched roof, a red door, a small garden where her mother grew vegetables, and a bedroom upstairs with a window that looked out over the cliffs. Now, here's where it gets absolutely chilling. Emma became hysterically afraid of the ocean, screaming and crying whenever her parents tried to take her near the beach. This was a child who had lived for swimming just a week earlier, but now she would have panic attacks at the mere sight of water. She started having violent nightmares, waking up gasping and crying, saying she was drowning, that the water was pulling her down, that she couldn't breathe. She would sob and say, "I couldn't get back to ma'am. I tried to swim back, but the water took me." Imagine watching your 5-year-old daughter wake up every night reliving what seems to be someone else's death. Extremely disturbing, right? David and Claire thought Emma was experiencing trauma from her near drowning, that her mind had created a fantasy to cope with what happened, but the level of detail bothered them. Emma had never been to Ireland. She had never heard Irish accents beyond perhaps something on television. So, how did she know so much about County Cork? Claire decided to investigate. She searched online for drowning incidents in County Cork, and what she found made her blood run cold. On July 22nd, 1978, a 5-year-old girl named Emma O'Brien drowned while playing on the beach near Kinsale. The girl's body was recovered 3 hours later. Her parents were Kathleen and Patrick O'Brien. Claire contacted researchers at the University of Virginia who specialize in cases of children who claim to remember past lives. Dr. Jim Tucker, who had documented hundreds of similar cases, traveled to Cornwall to interview Emma. What he discovered was absolutely baffling. Emma described the interior of the O'Brien cottage with perfect accuracy, including details that weren't in any public records or photographs. She talked about a stuffed rabbit she slept with that had one ear torn off. She described a specific song her mother Kathleen used to sing to her at bedtime, Doctor. Tucker tracked down Kathleen O'Brien, who was still alive and living in Cork. When he asked her about these details, Kathleen broke down in tears. Yes, Emma had a stuffed rabbit with a torn ear. Yes, Kathleen used to sing a specific Irish lullaby to her daughter every night. But here's what makes this case truly terrifying. Emma Hartley didn't just remember being Emma O'Brien. She seemed to have become Emma O'Brien. Her personality was different. She liked different foods, different games, different activities. Claire said it was like her daughter had died in that ocean, and someone else had taken over her body. Some researchers believe that when Emma Hartley drowned, her consciousness left her body. And in that brief window before the paramedics revived her, another consciousness, the consciousness of Emma O'Brien, who had drowned 35 years earlier, somehow entered instead. Think about this. What if when we die, our consciousness doesn't immediately move on? What if it floats in some kind of liminal space, waiting for the right opportunity to return? And what if Emma O'Brien's consciousness had been waiting since 1978 for a body? And when Emma Hartley's body became temporarily empty during those 4 minutes underwater, Emma O'Brien simply moved in? It sounds insane. But how else do you explain a child who comes back from drowning as a completely different person, with memories of a life that ended 3 decades before she was born? Or is something even stranger happening? What if Emma Hartley and Emma O'Brien are the same soul living in different timelines, and the near-death experience created a bridge that allowed the two versions to merge? Could drowning be a kind of portal that allows consciousness to slip between parallel lives? Is Emma Hartley living proof that death isn't the end, but rather a doorway to another version of ourselves living in another time? Absolutely fascinating and absolutely terrifying at the same time. And if you thought that case was disturbing, hold on tight, because what's coming next will completely shake your understanding of reality. Dr. Arthur Guerdon was a respected British psychiatrist, and he definitely did not believe in reincarnation. That is, until the early 1960s when one of his patients, a woman named Mrs. Smith, began describing vivid dreams about being a Cathar in 13th century France. The Cathars were a religious group that was brutally persecuted and massacred during the Albigensian Crusade. Mrs. Smith described specific details about Cathar religious practices, clothing, and daily life that weren't in any history books at the time. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. She told Dr. Guerdon that in her past life, he had been there too. He had been a Cathar priest named Roger, and he had tried to save her when she was burned at the stake. Dr. Guerdon thought this was completely absurd until he started having his own memories. He began dreaming about medieval France, about being Roger, and about watching helplessly as the woman he loved was executed. The details were so specific that he started researching, and he found his own name, Roger de Grisol, in obscure historical documents about the Cathar persecution. Even more disturbing, he found medical records showing that he had a birthmark on his back in the exact location where Roger de Grisol had been stabbed by an Inquisition soldier. Dr. Arthur Guirdham practiced psychiatry in Bath, England throughout the 1950s and 60s. He was a rational scientific man who had spent his entire career treating patients with conventional methods. He had published papers on psychology and mental health, and his colleagues considered him thoroughly skeptical of anything supernatural or paranormal. So, when a patient he called Mrs. Smith, protecting her identity, came to him in 1962, complaining of recurring nightmares, he expected to treat her for basic anxiety or trauma. He had absolutely no idea that this woman was about to completely destroy his understanding of reality. Mrs. Smith described dreams that were incredibly vivid and consistent. She said she was a young woman named Hélice de Mazerolles, living in the town of Toulouse in southern France in the early 1300s. She described wearing simple woolen dresses, attending secret religious gatherings in people's homes, and living in constant fear of the Catholic Inquisition that was hunting down Cathars. The Cathars believed in a dualistic theology that the Catholic Church declared heretical, and thousands were executed during the Albigensian Crusade. Mrs. Smith described ceremonies, prayers, and theological concepts that Dr. Guirdham had never heard of. She even sang songs in a language she didn't recognize. Imagine going to a psychiatrist for help with nightmares and suddenly singing in medieval Occitan, a language you've never studied. Pretty bizarre, right? But then, Mrs. Smith told Dr. Guirdham something that made him deeply uncomfortable. She said that in her dreams, he was there too. She described a man named Roger, a Cathar priest who was deeply in love with her but couldn't act on it because of his religious vows. She said Roger tried desperately to save her when the Inquisition arrested her in 1242, but he failed and she was burned at the stake in the town square while he watched. Dr. Guirdham tried to dismiss this as a patient's delusion, perhaps a transference issue where she was projecting feelings onto him. But then something happened that he couldn't explain. He started having the dreams too, night after night, doctor. Guirdham found himself dreaming about 13th century France with the same vividness Mrs. Smith described. He saw himself as Roger, wearing dark robes, conducting secret religious ceremonies, and feeling an overwhelming love for a woman named Hélice. The dreams were so intense and so specific that he began to write them down. He documented names, dates, locations, and events. And then, as a scientist, he decided to verify whether any of it was real. What he discovered shook him to his core. Dr. Guirdham traveled to France and began researching Cathar history in archives that weren't widely accessible to the public. He found records of the Inquisition trials in Toulouse from 1240 to 1244, and there, in handwritten documents from the 13th century, he found the names. Hélice de Mazerolles was a real person. Arrested by the Inquisition in 1242 and executed for heresy. Roger de Grisol was a Cathar priest who was also arrested and later killed. The records showed that Roger had attempted to intervene during Hélice's arrest and was wounded by an Inquisition soldier. The wound was described as a stab to the lower back. Now, here's where it gets absolutely mind-bending. Dr. Guirdham had been born with a large birthmark on his lower back, a dark discolored patch of skin that his doctors had documented since childhood. When he compared the location of this birthmark with the historical description of Roger de Grisol's stab wound, they matched perfectly. But it gets even more incredible. Mrs. Smith had described songs that the Cathars sang during their secret ceremonies. Dr. Guirdham recorded her singing these songs and brought them to linguistic experts. The experts confirmed they were in medieval Occitan, using grammatical structures and vocabulary from the 13th century. Mrs. Smith was a working-class woman with no education in medieval languages or history. There was absolutely no way she should have known these songs. Dr. Guirdham also discovered that Mrs. Smith knew details about Cathar daily life that weren't documented in any books available in the 1960s. She described the color of the robes the perfecti, the Cathar priests, wore. She described specific rituals and the exact wording of prayers. Years later, when new historical documents were discovered and translated, every single detail Mrs. Smith had provided was confirmed as accurate. She had described things that historians only learned about decades after she spoke about them. So, how do you explain this? Two people, a psychiatrist and his patient, both having detailed memories of the same historical period, recognizing each other from a past life, and providing verifiable information about events that happened 700 years ago. Skeptics argued that Dr. Gordon must have unconsciously researched Cathar history and suggested details to his patient during therapy sessions. But Mrs. Smith started having these dreams years before she met Dr. Gurdam, and she knew details that weren't in any accessible historical sources at the time. Believers in reincarnation say this is clear proof that we live multiple lives and that souls can recognize each other across centuries. But here's what's truly fascinating. Dr. Gordon didn't just remember being Roger. He felt like he was Roger, like that life was just as real as his current existence. He wrote in his journals that sometimes he couldn't tell which life was the dream and which was reality. Think about this. What if Dr. Gurdam and Mrs. Smith aren't remembering past lives at all? What if they're experiencing parallel timelines simultaneously? Could Roger de Grisoles and Hélice de Mazaroles still be living in 1342 in another layer of reality? And somehow their consciousness is entangled with Dr. Gurdam and Mrs. Smith in 1962? What if the barrier between timelines can become thin enough that we experience both lives at once? And here's an even stranger possibility. What if Dr. Gordam's birthmark isn't a remnant from a past life, but physical proof that our bodies carry imprints from parallel versions of ourselves existing in other times? Could every birthmark, every unexplained scar, every mysterious physical condition be evidence of trauma or injury experienced by a parallel version of us in another timeline? Is Dr. Gurdam's case proof that we're not living one life, but many lives simultaneously across different periods of history? Absolutely mind-blowing when you consider the implications. And trust me, if this case has you questioning everything you thought you knew about consciousness and time, what's coming next is going to take it to an entirely different level. In 1999, a set of identical twin girls were born in North Carolina. When they were 18 months old, one of the twins, Emily, died suddenly from meningitis. Her sister, Sarah, was too young to remember her, or at least she should have been. But when Sarah turned 3 years old in 2002, she started talking about Emily as if she remembered being her. She would say things like, "Remember when I died and you were crying? And I came back because I wasn't finished playing with you yet." Her parents were heartbroken and assumed Sarah had overheard conversations about Emily. But then Sarah started describing events that happened before Emily died, events that only Emily could have experienced. She talked about a specific toy that Emily had hidden under her crib the day before she got sick, a toy the parents had completely forgotten about until they searched and found it. She described the hospital room where Emily died, even though Sarah had never been there. Most eerily, Sarah had a small birthmark on her left ankle, in the exact spot where Emily had an IV line inserted during her final hours. Mark and Jennifer Collins had been overjoyed when they learned they were having twins. Emily and Sarah were born on March 12, 1999, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and for the first year and a half of their lives, everything seemed perfect. The girls were inseparable, sleeping in the same crib, reaching developmental milestones together, even developing their own twin language of babbles and gestures that only they seemed to understand. Friends and family said you could barely tell them apart except for one small detail. Emily had a tiny birthmark on her right shoulder, and Sarah had none. But in September of 2000, when the twins were just 18 months old, Emily developed a fever. Within 24 hours, she was in the pediatric intensive care unit at UNC Medical Center, fighting bacterial meningitis. The infection moved too fast. Despite aggressive treatment, Emily died on September 21, 2000. She was in the hospital for only 36 hours. Sarah stayed home with her grandmother during the time and never visited the hospital. She was too young to understand what was happening, and her parents wanted to protect her from the trauma. Jennifer and Mark were devastated, but they tried to move forward, focusing on raising Sarah and keeping Emily's memory alive through photographs and stories. For the first year after Emily's death, Sarah seemed like a normal toddler, dealing with the loss of her twin in whatever limited way an 18-month-old could process it. But then, shortly after Sarah's third birthday in March 2002, something absolutely bizarre began to happen. Sarah started talking about Emily not as someone who was gone, but as someone she had been. She would say things like, quote, 41, or quote, 42. At first, Jennifer thought Sarah was confused, that she was mixing up her own identity with her sister's because she'd seen so many photos of them together. But then Sarah said something that made Jennifer's blood run cold. They were looking at a photo album together, and Sarah pointed to a picture of Emily and said, "That's me when I was Emily. I died, Mommy." It hurt a lot. But then I came back as Sarah because I didn't want to leave you and Daddy alone. Jennifer tried to stay calm, tried to explain gently that, "No, sweetheart, that was your sister Emily, and you're Sarah." But Sarah became upset and insisted, quote, 44. Now, here's where it gets absolutely chilling. Sarah began providing specific details about Emily's final days that she couldn't possibly know. She described the hospital room, saying it had bold blue curtains and a window that looked out at a parking lot with a red car. Jennifer checked the photos she'd taken on her phone during Emily's hospitalization. Photos she'd never shown Sarah because they were too painful. The room did have blue curtains, and there was indeed a red car visible in the parking lot outside the window. Sarah described the IV in her ankle, saying, quote, 45, and pointing to her left ankle. Emily had indeed had an IV placed in her left ankle during her treatment because the nurses couldn't find a good vein in her arms. But the most disturbing detail came when Sarah casually mentioned a stuffed elephant that she said she'd hidden under her crib the day before she got sick. Jennifer had no memory of any stuffed elephant, but something made her go to the twins' old nursery, which they had converted into a playroom, and look under what had been Emily's crib. Behind a board against the wall, she found a small gray stuffed elephant covered in dust. Jennifer called Mark, and neither of them could remember Emily ever having that toy. But when they asked Sarah about it, she said, "That was my favorite. I hid it there because I didn't want Sarah to play with it while I was at the hospital." Researchers from the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia came to interview Sarah when she was 4 years old. They documented over 30 specific details Sarah provided about Emily's life and death. Every single one was verified as accurate. But here's what made the researchers' investigation even more extraordinary. When Sarah was examined by a pediatrician, the doctor noticed a small, faint birthmark on her left ankle that hadn't been there at birth. Jennifer pulled out Sarah's newborn photos and early baby pictures. Absolutely no birthmark, but photos of Sarah after age 2 clearly showed a small reddish mark on her left ankle, in the exact location where Emily's IV had been placed. Medical experts say birthmarks can sometimes appear as children grow, but the timing and location in this case are absolutely baffling. Skeptics argue that Sarah must have overheard her parents talking about Emily or seen photos and videos, and her young mind created a narrative where she became her sister. But Sarah described things that weren't in any photos or videos, things her parents had never discussed. The hidden elephant, the specific pain of the IV placement, the view from the hospital window, all details a 3-year-old shouldn't have access to. So, how do we explain this? Is Sarah actually Emily reincarnated, her soul returning to the same family because the bond with her twin was too strong to break? Think about this. Twin bonds are known to be extraordinarily powerful, with twins often reporting they can feel each other's emotions even when separated. What if that bond is strong enough to transcend death itself? What if Emily's consciousness couldn't let go of Sarah, and when given the opportunity, simply moved from one body to the other? Or is something even stranger happening? What if Sarah and Emily were never truly separate people at all? What if identical twins share more than just DNA? Could they share aspects of the same consciousness, the same soul split between two bodies? And when one body died, did the consciousness simply consolidate back into the surviving twin? Some quantum physicists believe that consciousness can exist in a state of superposition, present in multiple locations simultaneously. Could identical twins be a physical manifestation of this? One consciousness experiencing reality through two separate bodies at once? And here's the most mind-bending possibility. What if Emily didn't die at all in another timeline, and Sarah is somehow experiencing memories from a parallel reality where she was the one who got sick and Emily was the one who survived? Could the barrier between these parallel timelines be so thin that Sarah's mind is accessing experiences from a version of events that happen differently in another layer of reality? Is the birthmark on her ankle physical proof that our bodies can carry imprints from our parallel selves? Think about this. If Sarah really is experiencing Emily's memories and consciousness, does that mean Emily never truly died? Is she still here, living through Sarah, experiencing life through her sister's eyes? Pretty fascinating and pretty terrifying when you consider what it means about the nature of identity, death, and consciousness itself. And trust me, if this case has you questioning everything about life and death, what's coming next is going to completely shatter your understanding of reality. Dr. Sean Harabance was a quantum physicist working at CERN in 2007 when he started experiencing what he called the Miley quote 47. He claimed he was receiving memories from other versions of himself in parallel universes, versions where he had made different choices and lived completely different lives. In one timeline, he was a musician who died in a car accident in 2003. In another, he was a homeless man in Detroit. In yet another, he was a soldier who was killed in Iraq. His colleagues thought he was having a mental breakdown, but Dr. Harabance was a rigorous scientist, so he started documenting everything. He wrote down names, dates, locations, and specific events from these, quote, 48. Then he started investigating. And the results were absolutely terrifying. He found obituaries matching the people he claimed to be, death certificates, news articles, everything. In every case, these people had died, but Dr. Harabance insisted he was them, living in parallel. His final research paper, published just before he mysteriously disappeared in 2009, proposed that reincarnation isn't about dying and being reborn. It's about consciousness existing in multiple timelines simultaneously, and occasionally the barriers break down. Dr. Sean Harabance was 34 years old in 2007, working on particle collision experiments at CERN's Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland. He had a PhD in theoretical physics from MIT, had published numerous papers on quantum mechanics, and was considered one of the brightest minds in his field. His specialty was studying quantum entanglement, the phenomenon where two particles remain connected regardless of distance, influencing each other instantaneously. He was brilliant, rational, and absolutely grounded in scientific methodology. So, when he started experiencing what he described as memories from parallel versions of himself, his first instinct was to assume he had a brain tumor or was developing schizophrenia. But the experiences were too vivid, too consistent, and too specific to be hallucinations. It started in March of 2007. Dr. Harabance was working late in the lab when suddenly he felt a strange sensation, like a wave of déjà vu, but infinitely more intense. And then he was somewhere else, not physically, but mentally. He could see himself sitting in a small apartment in Detroit, holding a guitar, struggling to pay rent. He could feel the calluses on his fingers from playing, smell the cigarette smoke in the room, taste the cheap coffee he was drinking, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was him, a version of himself who had chosen music over physics, who had dropped out of college and moved to Detroit to pursue a dream that never came true. The vision lasted only a few seconds, but when it ended, Dr. Harabance was shaking. Over the next few weeks, more visions came. He saw himself as a U.S. Army soldier stationed in Iraq, saw himself getting hit by an IED during a patrol in Baghdad, felt the explosion, experienced his own death. He saw himself as a successful businessman in London, as a taxi driver in Mumbai, as a fisherman in Norway. Each vision was accompanied by overwhelming emotional content, memories of childhoods that weren't his, relationships he'd never had, decisions he'd never made. Imagine experiencing your own death multiple times in multiple ways, all while sitting at your desk at CERN. Absolutely terrifying, right? But Dr. Harabance didn't panic. Instead, he did what any good scientist would do. He started keeping a detailed journal. He documented every vision, writing down names, dates, locations, specific events, physical descriptions, anything concrete he could verify. He noted that in the timeline where he was a musician, his name was Sean Morrison, and he lived in Detroit from 2000 to 2003. In the soldier timeline, he was Corporal Sean Harris, deployed to Iraq in 2006. He wrote down addresses, names of friends and family from these other lives, even specific dates of death. Then, in April of 2007, Dr. Harabance began investigating. He started with the musician. He searched online for Sean Morrison in Detroit and found an obituary from August 2003. Sean Morrison, age 29, died in a car accident on Interstate 75. The photo in the obituary showed a man who looked exactly like Dr. Harabance. Same facial structure, same eyes, same distinctive scar above the left eyebrow that Dr. Harabance had gotten from a childhood bicycle accident. The obituary mentioned that Sean had been a struggling guitarist who played in local bars and had recently been evicted from his apartment. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. Dr. Harabance tracked down Sean Morrison's former landlord in Detroit and called him, pretending to be a relative. The landlord described Sean's apartment, and it matched exactly what Dr. Harabance had seen in his vision, down to the water stain on the ceiling and the broken window latch. Dr. Harabance then searched for Corporal Sean Harris and found a Department of Defense casualty report. Corporal Sean Harris, age 32, killed in action in Baghdad on November 14, 2006, by an improvised explosive device. The photo showed another man who looked like Dr. Harabance, and the circumstances of death matched the vision perfectly. Over the next year, Dr. Harabance investigated every parallel life he experienced. He found death certificates, news articles, social media profiles, everything. In every single case, he found evidence that these people had existed and had died. The homeless man in Detroit, the businessman in London, the fisherman in Norway. All real people, all dead. All looking exactly like him. His colleagues at CERN became increasingly concerned. They staged an intervention suggesting he take medical leave, see a psychiatrist. But Dr. Harabance refused. He said he was conducting the most important research of his life. In his journal, which was later found in his office, Dr. Harabance developed a theoretical framework to explain what was happening to him. He proposed that the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, the idea that every decision creates a branching timeline, was literally true, and he suggested that consciousness isn't confined to a single timeline. Instead, it exists as a kind of quantum wave function spread across all possible versions of a person's life simultaneously. In most people, the wave function remains coherent within a single timeline, but in rare cases, perhaps triggered by proximity to high-energy particle collisions like those at CERN, the barriers between timelines become permeable, and a person becomes aware of their parallel selves. Dr. Harabance's final research paper, published in an obscure physics journal in January 2009, was titled Quantum Consciousness and Timeline Multiplicity, a new framework for understanding reincarnation. In it, he argued that what we call reincarnation is actually consciousness existing simultaneously in multiple timelines, and that sometimes we access memories from parallel versions of ourselves. He wrote, "I am not remembering past lives. I am experiencing current lives, all happening now in different layers of reality." The paper was largely ignored by the scientific community, dismissed as the ramblings of a man who had lost his grip on reality. But then, on March 3, 2009, Dr. Sean Harabance vanished. He left his apartment in Geneva that morning to go to work at CERN and never arrived. His car was found abandoned near the French border with the keys still in the ignition. His phone, wallet, and identification were all in the car. Security footage showed him getting into his car and driving away, but there was no footage of him ever getting out. Search teams found absolutely nothing. No body, no trace, no explanation. To this day, no one knows what happened to him. So, what are we supposed to make of this? Skeptics say, doctor. Harabance suffered a mental breakdown, that the stress of working at CERN triggered some form of psychosis, and that he either staged his disappearance or met with foul play. But how do you explain the evidence he found? The obituaries, the death certificates, the people who looked exactly like him, who had all died in different circumstances? The odds of finding that many doppelgangers by coincidence are astronomical. Think about this. What if Dr. Harabance was right? What if consciousness really does exist across multiple timelines simultaneously, and most of us are just unaware of it? What if every version of you, in every possible reality where you made different choices, is alive right now, experiencing a different life? And what if the barriers between these timelines can break down, allowing you to suddenly become aware of all your parallel selves at once? Could that be what happened to Dr. Harabantz? Did he become so aware of his other timelines that he somehow slipped entirely into a different one? Or did something even stranger happen? What if his disappearance wasn't an accident? What if he figured out how to consciously move between timelines, and he simply chose to leave this one? Is Dr. Sean Harabantz still out there somewhere, in another version of reality, living a different life as a different version of himself? And if consciousness can exist in multiple timelines at once, does that mean that you, right now, are also living countless other lives in parallel universes, and you just don't know it? Absolutely mind-bending when you think about it. And trust me, if this case already has you questioning the fundamental nature of reality and consciousness, what's coming next is going to take it to an entirely new level of impossible. In 2016, a 10-year-old girl named Lily Anderson in Melbourne, Australia began experiencing disturbing visions of her own death. She told her parents that she had died in a house fire when she was 6 years old. And she described her funeral in perfect detail. She talked about the white coffin, the pink roses, the hymn that was sung, and the fact that her grandmother wore a blue dress. Her parents were understandably terrified, but they tried to reassure her that it was just a nightmare. Except Lily kept insisting it had really happened. She said, quote, 51 disturbed, her mother contacted a researcher who specialized in past life memories in children. And together, they began investigating. What they discovered made the entire family question reality. In 2012, there actually was a 6-year-old girl named Lily Anderson who died in a house fire in a suburb just 20 kilometers away. And when they contacted that Lily's family and asked about the funeral, every single detail matched. The white coffin, the pink roses, the grandmother in the blue dress, everything. But the deceased Lily's parents said something that made it even more chilling. They told the researcher, quote, 52, Lily Anderson lived with her parents, Michael and Rebecca, in the suburb of Brighton in Melbourne. She was a completely normal 10-year-old girl who loved gymnastics, had a small group of close friends, and was doing well in school. There was nothing unusual about her life until September of 2016, when she woke up one night screaming. Rebecca rushed to her daughter's bedroom and found Lily sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, saying over and over, "I remember dying. I remember the fire. I couldn't get out." At first, Rebecca assumed Lily had watched something frightening on television or had a particularly vivid nightmare. But Lily became increasingly insistent that this wasn't a dream. Over the next few weeks, she started providing more and more details about what she called, quote, 54, quote. She said that in that timeline, she lived in a different house in a suburb called Bentley, about 20 kilometers south of Brighton. She described the house as a single-story weatherboard cottage painted yellow with a front porch and a large oak tree in the yard. She said the fire started in the middle of the night on March 27, 2012. She remembered waking up to the smell of smoke, trying to get to her parents' room, but the hallway was already engulfed in flames. Now, here's where it gets absolutely chilling. Lily described her funeral with the kind of detail that no 10-year-old should be able to provide about their own death. She said she was buried in a white coffin with silver handles. She described standing there, somehow watching the ceremony, even though she knew she was dead. She talked about pink roses covering the coffin, about how the minister sang, quote, 55, quote, and about how her grandmother, who she called Nana June, wore a blue dress with small white flowers on it. She even mentioned that it was raining during the burial and that her father broke down crying so hard that her uncle had to hold him up. Imagine hearing your child describe watching their own funeral in perfect detail. Extremely disturbing, right? Rebecca and Michael tried everything to convince Lily she was confused, that she'd had a bad dream, that none of it was real. But Lily remained absolutely certain. She would say things like, "I know you think I'm making it up, but I'm not. I really did die, but somehow I'm here now. in this version of my life where the fire never happened. Finally, in October 2016, Rebecca contacted Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a psychologist who had studied cases of children claiming to remember past lives. Dr. Hernandez agreed to investigate, fully expecting to find a rational explanation. But what Dr. Hernandez discovered shook her to her core. She started by searching for house fires in the Melbourne area around the date Lily had mentioned, and she found it. On March 27, 2012, there was indeed a fatal house fire in Bentley. A 6-year-old girl named Lily Anderson died in that fire. Dr. Hernandez felt her blood run cold. She obtained the address and drove past the property. It was exactly as 10-year-old Lily had described. A yellow weatherboard cottage with a front porch and a large oak tree in the yard, though it had been partially rebuilt after the fire. Dr. Hernandez then did something that took enormous courage. She contacted the deceased Lily's parents, Robert and Margaret Anderson, and asked if she could speak with them about their daughter. When she met with them and explained what was happening, Robert and Margaret were initially skeptical and deeply hurt, thinking this was some kind of cruel prank. But then Dr. Hernandez asked them about the funeral. Margaret started crying. Yes, they had chosen a white coffin with silver handles. Yes, they had covered it in pink roses, Lily's favorite flower. Yes, Margaret's mother wore a blue dress with small white flowers. Yes, it had rained during the burial, and yes, Robert had broken down so severely that his brother had to support him. Now, here's what makes this case absolutely mind-bending. Dr. Hernandez showed Robert and Margaret photos of 10-year-old Lily Anderson from Brighton. The resemblance to their deceased daughter was striking. Same facial structure, same eyes, same smile. The families agreed to meet, and when 10-year-old Lily saw photos of the Bentley house before the fire, she broke down crying and said, "That's my room. That's where I slept. I remember that exact wallpaper." She pointed to specific toys in the photos and named them. She described family memories, birthday parties, trips to the beach, things that only the Bentley Lily could have known. But here's the detail that made everyone question reality itself. Robert Anderson pulled out a journal that his daughter had kept in the months before her death. In it, she had drawn pictures and written childish sentences about her dreams. One entry from February 2012, just a month before the fire, read, quote, "I was 58. She had drawn a picture of a 2-story house that looked remarkably similar to the Brighton home where 10-year-old Lily currently lived. So, what are we supposed to make of this? Skeptics would argue it's an extraordinary coincidence that 2 families with daughters named Lily Anderson happened to live near each other, and the surviving Lily somehow learned about the deceased Lily and incorporated that tragedy into a fantasy. But how would she know details about the funeral that were never reported in the news? How would she know about the blue dress with white flowers or the specific hymn that was sung? And how do you explain that the deceased Lily drew pictures of a future life before she died? Think about this. What if both Lilies are the same consciousness existing in 2 parallel timelines simultaneously? In one timeline, Lily dies in the fire at age 6. In another timeline, the fire never happens, and Lily lives to age 10 and beyond. But what if consciousness isn't confined to a single timeline? What if 10-year-old Lily can access memories from the timeline where she died, and 6-year-old Lily could access visions of the timeline where she survived? Could this be proof that all possible versions of our lives are happening simultaneously in parallel realities? And here's an even more terrifying possibility. What if every time you have a close call, a near-death experience, a moment where you almost died but didn't, you actually do die in another timeline? What if there's a version of you that didn't survive that car accident, that fall, that illness, and somewhere in another layer of reality? People are mourning your death while you continue living here, completely unaware? Could we all be living in timelines where we survived while other versions of us perished and we just don't remember? Is Lily Anderson proof that death isn't the end, but simply a split in timelines where consciousness continues in one reality while ending in another? And if that's true, does that mean every choice we make, every decision, creates a new timeline where a different version of us lives a completely different life? Are there infinite versions of you right now, some living, some dead, all existing simultaneously across the multiverse? Absolutely mind-blowing and absolutely terrifying when you think about it. And if this case has completely shattered your understanding of life, death, and reality itself, then you're ready for the final case. Because what's coming next is the most impossible, most reality-defying story you'll ever hear. This case is by far the most mind-bending, reality-shattering story you'll ever hear. And it happened in 2018 in Dublin, Ireland. A 35-year-old man named Conor O'Reilly was driving home from work when he saw someone standing on the side of the road who looked exactly like him. Not similar, exactly like him. Same face, same height, same build. Conor pulled over, and when the man turned around, Conor's blood went cold. It was him. The man was wearing clothes from the 1920s, and he looked absolutely terrified. Before Conor could say anything, the man ran up to the car window and said, "You have to remember, we keep living this over and over. Every time we die, we come back, but we're all happening at the same time." Then he told Conor his full name, his mother's maiden name, and the exact date Conor was going to die, March 7th, 2023. Conor thought he was losing his mind. But he recorded everything and reported it to the police. They found no one matching the description and assumed Conor had experienced a hallucination. But then Conor started having memories that weren't his own. Memories of dying in a factory accident in 1934. Memories of being a soldier in World War I. Memories of living in Dublin in 1792. Each memory was so vivid and so specific that Conor began investigating historical records, and he found himself over and over again. Different names, different lives, but always the same face in old photographs, the same birthmark, the same scar on his left hand. Conor became convinced that he wasn't experiencing reincarnation in the traditional sense. He believed all his lives were happening simultaneously in parallel timelines, and that sometimes the timelines overlapped, allowing him to meet himself. But here's the part that makes this case truly terrifying. Conor O'Reilly died in a car accident on March 7th, 2023. The exact date his Itzar, quote, 60 or so, had predicted 5 years earlier. Conor O'Reilly was a software developer living in Ranelagh, a quiet neighborhood in South Dublin. He was married to a woman named Sinead, had a 7-year-old daughter named Aoifo, and by all accounts lived a completely ordinary life. He worked for a tech company in the city center, coached his daughter's football team on weekends, and had never experienced anything remotely supernatural or unexplained. So, what happened on the evening of November 12th, 2018 absolutely shattered his entire understanding of reality. Conor was driving home from work around 7 in the evening, taking his usual route through residential streets. It was already dark, and the streetlights cast long shadows along the pavement. As he turned onto Beechwood Avenue, he noticed a figure standing under a streetlight, and something about the person made him slow down. The man was dressed strangely, wearing what looked like a wool coat and flat cap from the early 20th century. But as Conor got closer, his heart started pounding. The man looked exactly like him. Same height, same build, same facial features. Conor pulled his car over to the curb, his hands shaking. Imagine seeing yourself standing on a street corner, dressed in clothes from 100 years ago. Absolutely insane, right? The man turned and looked directly at Conor, and his eyes, Conor's own eyes, were filled with terror and urgency. Before Conor could process what was happening, the man ran to the car window. Conor lowered it, and the man grabbed the edge of the door and said in a rapid, desperate voice, "Conor, listen to me. You have to remember, this isn't the first time. We keep living this over and over. Every time we die, we come back, but it's not linear. We're all happening at the same time. All the lives, all the deaths, all at once." Conor sat frozen, unable to speak. The man continued, "Your mother's maiden name is Byrne. You have a scar on your left hand from when you fell off your bike when you were 8. You have a birthmark on your right shoulder blade shaped like a crescent moon. And Conor, you're going to die on March 7th, 2023. I know because I'm you, and I've already lived past that date in another timeline." Then, before Conor could respond, the man looked over his shoulder as if he'd heard something and said, quote, "N63. He turned and ran into the darkness between two houses and vanished. Conor sat in his car, his heart racing. his mind trying to process what had just happened. He immediately pulled out his phone and started recording a voice memo describing everything he'd just witnessed, every word the man had said. Then he called the police. Officers arrived within 20 minutes and searched the area thoroughly. They found absolutely nothing. No trace of anyone matching Connor's description, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been there at all. The police filed a report, but ultimately concluded that Connor had either experienced a vivid hallucination or had been the victim of an elaborate prank by someone who looked like him. But Connor knew what he'd seen. And then, 3 days later, something even stranger began to happen. Connor started having memories that weren't his. He would be sitting at his desk at work and suddenly remember dying in a factory. He could see the machines, smell the oil and metal, feel the crushing pain as industrial equipment malfunctioned and caught his arm, pulling him in. The memory was so vivid that he gasped and grabbed his arm, expecting to find it mangled, but it was fine, completely normal. Over the next few weeks, more memories came, each one distinct, each one ending in death. He remembered being a soldier in World War I, crouching in a muddy trench somewhere in France, hearing the whistle of incoming artillery, and then the explosion, the blackness, the end. He remembered living in 18th century Dublin, working as a clerk, catching a fever that slowly consumed him over weeks until he died in a small room overlooking the River Liffey. Each memory came with complete sensory detail and overwhelming emotional content. It wasn't like remembering something he'd read in a book or seen in a movie. It felt like remembering his own experiences. Connor became obsessed with documenting everything. He filled notebooks with details from each memory, writing down names, dates, locations, occupations, physical descriptions. He noted that in every memory, he had the same scar on his left hand and the same crescent-shaped birthmark on his right shoulder blade. Then he started researching. He searched historical records, old newspapers, census data, death certificates. And what he found was absolutely terrifying. In 1934, there were records of a factory accident at the Guinness Brewery in Dublin that killed a man named Cormac O'Ryan. Connor found a photograph in the archives. The man looked exactly like him, same face, same features. He searched military records from World War I and found a soldier named Connor Riley who died in France in 1917. Again, the photograph showed a man who could have been Connor's twin. He found census records from 1792, listing a Connor O'Reilly working as a clerk in Dublin. He found a death record from 1793 stating the cause of death as typhoid fever. In every case, the names were variations of his own name, the faces in photographs or descriptions matched his appearance, and every single one had died. Now, here's where it gets absolutely chilling. Connor contacted Dr. Fiona Murphy, a researcher at Trinity College Dublin, who studied cases of past life memories. Dr. Murphy interviewed Connor extensively and was struck by the consistency and specificity of his accounts. She helped him investigate further, and they discovered even more instances. A Connor O'Reilly who died in the Great Famine of 1847. A Connor O'Reilly who was executed during the Irish Rebellion of 1641. Each time they found historical evidence, and each time, when photographs or detailed descriptions existed, they matched Connor's appearance. Dr. Murphy documented everything in a case study that she submitted to the Journal of Consciousness Studies in 2019. But before the paper could be peer-reviewed, the prediction came true. On March 7, 2023, Connor O'Reilly was driving to work when his car was struck by a delivery truck that ran a red light at a junction in central Dublin. Connor was killed instantly. The accident happened at 8:42 in the morning. His wife Sinead was devastated. His daughter Eowulf lost her father, and Dr. Murphy was left with a case file that she could barely comprehend. After Connor's death, Dr. Murphy went through all his notebooks and recordings. In one entry from January 2023, just 2 months before he died, Connor wrote, "I think I understand now. We're not living one life at a time. We're living all our lives simultaneously in parallel timelines. Time isn't a line, it's a web, and we exist at every point on that web at once. When I met myself on the street in 2018, the barriers between timelines broke down for just a moment. That version of me, from the 1920s, somehow crossed over and warned me. but I can't change what's going to happen. I've tried. I've been so careful driving, but I think it's fixed. March 7th is when this version of me ends, and then I continue in other timelines, other lives. So, what are we supposed to believe? Skeptics say Connor experienced a mental break, perhaps triggered by stress or an undiagnosed medical condition, and that his death was a tragic coincidence. But how do you explain the historical records? How do you explain the photographs of men from different centuries who all look exactly like Connor, who all share variations of his name, who all have the same scar and the same birthmark? And most terrifyingly, how do you explain that he died exactly when his doppelganger predicted, down to the very day 5 years in advance? Think about this. What if Connor O'Reilly was right? What if we're all living multiple lives simultaneously across different timelines, and most of us are just unaware of it? What if every version of you across all possible timelines is alive right now, experiencing different choices, different outcomes, different deaths? And what if occasionally, when the conditions are just right, the barriers between these timelines become thin enough that you can actually meet yourself from another time, another life, another version of reality? Could Connor's encounter have been a glitch in the multiverse? A moment when two timelines intersected and two versions of the same consciousness briefly occupied the same space? And if that's possible, does it mean that right now, somewhere in another timeline, there's a version of you living in the past or the future, experiencing a completely different life, and you're connected to them in ways you can't even comprehend? Is Connor O'Reilly proof that death isn't the end, but simply a transition to another timeline where we continue living as another version of ourselves? And here's the most terrifying question of all. If Connor knew exactly when he was going to die and couldn't prevent it, does that mean our deaths are fixed points across all timelines? Are there certain moments in time where all versions of us converge and end, only to split again into new timelines, new lives, new possibilities? Is death not an ending but a reset, a return to the beginning of the cycle, where we live all our lives over and over again, simultaneously, eternally, across infinite versions of reality? Connor O'Reilly's case is the most compelling evidence we have that reincarnation isn't about living one life, dying, and being reborn into another. It's about consciousness existing everywhere and everyone all at once. And sometimes, just sometimes, the walls between our parallel lives crack open just enough for us to glimpse the truth. That we are infinite, that we are eternal, that we are living and dying and living again in every possible version of existence, all at the same time. Absolutely mind-shattering when you truly think about it.